Hi, at Panem 360, we are with Andy Brick, who is a composer, orchestrator, and a conductor. And this time, I talk with the conductor mainly, I suppose, because tomorrow night at Salle Wilfrid Pelletier, with the Choeur FILMharmonique, you're going to conduct music from games. And you're involved in that type of translation, symphonic translation, I would say, since a long time. So what is this chapter in Montreal?
Yeah, well, I have been doing it for a long time. In fact, I was the very first guy to do a symphonic game music concert in the Western world. That was in 2003 in Leipzig, Germany. And in the 20 years since then, I think video game music has evolved quite a bit to the place where now it's really becoming part of the orchestral repertoire that orchestras can play. So I think what we're going to hear tomorrow night in Montreal is sort of the greatest hits of the symphonic game music, but also the ones that we've curated really well to bring something very special to the orchestra.
Yeah, some became classics, I suppose, because you're involved in that since almost the early 90s, I would say.
Yeah, there are quite a few that have become classics. So we'll be doing like World of Warcraft, which is definitely a classic. We're going to be doing Assassin's Creed, which especially in Montreal, because Ubisoft, the publisher, is here, is a
big
classic.
Office of Ubisoft in Montreal, yeah.
Yeah, so we're going to actually be doing Assassin's Creed from Ubisoft. We'll be doing a couple of more recent titles, like we're going to do Ori and the Blind Forest, which is maybe just 10 years old or 8 years old, something like that. Maybe not as old as World of Warcraft or the Assassin's Creed franchise, but has sort of established itself as being a classic. So I think that the audience is going to really get a chance to hear all of the games that they really love. And for those audience members that aren't gamers, what we've done is, if you can imagine you're in a museum and there's a curator, an art curator, telling you about the artwork that's up on the wall. Well, instead of having a curator tell you about the artwork that's on the wall, imagine that you have these 110 musicians of the orchestra telling you the story of the videos, the high definition videos that you see behind them. And we approach it that way. So even for the hardcore gamers, you're going to get everything you love, including some additional bonus footage that you've never seen. For the non-gamers, you're going to have a really enriching experience because the orchestra will be telling you the story.
I suppose that Game On is performing a lot of different programs, and this one has been designed for a North American tour and with different orchestra, or what? Yeah,
so Game On performs worldwide. We premiered with the National Symphony of the United States at the Kennedy Center in 2020, exactly 1 month before COVID hit and shut down all of the halls. So then we were closed down for about 2 years. And then 2 years ago, we came back and we performed in Asia and Europe, United States, Canada. And we have a catalog of about 24 different pieces from which we choose anywhere between 12 and 14, depending on the location we're going to. So in the case of Montreal, it is a bit customized because there are a lot of game developers here. So we sort of leaned into the games that have representation here, which we like to do because we like to pay homage to the developers, the local developers.
Oh yeah, it's interesting. And about the evolution of the orchestrations and more specifically the arrangements, the language, of course, did change a lot over 30 years and more. So where are we now? And maybe there are many tendencies of orchestrating gaming music. So on your side, what is the tendency of now, and really, how is it related to what we will see and hear tomorrow night?
It's a really good question, actually, because the evolution of symphonic game music has changed quite a bit over the years. So in the very early days, we were translating 8-bit soundtracks. So basically computer bleeps and blips that were really limited by the technology. We just didn't have the space in the games at that time to have big, lush orchestral soundtracks. So it was a lot of adaptation. Since then, especially in the past 10 years or so, games have featured full orchestral soundtracks. So now what the mission is for me is to find those orchestral soundtracks that really present something different or something special, and then present them to the world. And I like to do it in a way that also engages the orchestra. So for example, we do a piece from BioShock. We do a suite from the game called BioShock. And in BioShock, there's a piano solo called Cohn's Masterpiece, which if you play BioShock, you know it has special significance. It's an incredibly difficult piano solo. And we do the piano solo because it presents something really special and something kind of different. Of course, there's the traditional big horn and brass anthems, and we do it in World of Warcraft. There's no better piece for that. We do big, beautiful choir pieces that feature the choir in Assassin's Creed 2. You'll hear some of that. We try to really make each piece something special, not only for the audience, but also for the orchestra in the way that the pieces were orchestrated.
Well, most of the soundtracks from game music and gaming has been mainly electronic, and progressively it became more and more symphonic and instrumental. But now, how do you deal in the aesthetics of electronic music in a symphonic way, I would say?
It's a really good question. So we have a couple of pieces in the concert that were originally electronic music pieces. And what you have to do is you sit down, you listen to the piece, whoever's orchestrating it, in most cases it's me. I'll sit down with the audio director of the game company and I'll say, okay, what is it that you want to achieve with this piece of music when we convert it into orchestra? And there's sort of two approaches. You can do sounds like, so you have a low-pitched sort of staccato sound. Okay, put it in the pizzicato basses or something like that. And then there's another approach where you just reimagine what the piece would sound like if it were orchestra, so that you're not just doing a one-for-one conversion, but you're sort of reconceptualizing the piece. So that's sort of the basic process. And then it goes back and forth between the orchestrator and the development team to make sure that they're happy with it. And a lot of times we'll kind of throw in surprises, like we'll do things in the acoustic instruments that aren't necessarily things that you would expect acoustic instruments to do to mimic or imitate the soundtrack.
Yeah. And about the execution, well, the performance aspect of the instrumental orchestras, the symphonic, very large ensembles that you're conducting. Also, about game music, there's a knowledge much higher right now that we could have decades ago, even years ago. And we have many orchestras that are almost are actually specialized in only this music. So about the relation you can have between the conducting aspect and those orchestras. They are different. Montreal is maybe different from others. How do you see that?
Yeah, every orchestra is unique. There's no doubt about it. You go to one location with one orchestra and their approach and their mannerisms and their habits is a completely different story than with the next orchestra. And that's one of the big challenges for a guy like me, who is a guest conductor and coming and playing with an orchestra for a couple of days and then leaving and going and playing with the next orchestra. I think there's a vocabulary, both in the music and in conducting technique. And if you know the vocabulary, it helps to make the transition from one orchestra to the next easier. It's also from the player's perspective, you have to understand they're oftentimes, especially with established orchestras, they're used to the mannerisms of their resident conductor. So when a new guy like me walks in and begins to work with them, there's a sort of language that has to develop very, very quickly. So that's important. And there's a way to do that. It's not terribly difficult. Then for the actual repertoire, I try to draw parallels when I'm in a rehearsal. So I'll say, okay, you know, you remember Holst and the planets and Mars. Well, we're going to do a piece now, and I want you to think about that passage in Mars where you have the real staccato, you know, strings, and we're going to kind of go for that kind of a sound here, if they're not getting it right away. But most of these orchestras, you know, they're really good, so they pretty much pick up on it very quickly.
Yeah. Also, we observe that the level of the musicians everywhere in the world, mainly not only in Western world, but in any big cities of the world, is much better than it was even one generation ago. So you can, it makes life easier for conductors that travels with different orchestras. And how have you been in touch with the Montreal one?
Yeah, well, we had our first rehearsal this past Monday. And then I had a few days off just because of scheduling. So I've been with them for about 2.5 hours, and we'll have another rehearsal tomorrow before the concert. And yeah, they're complete pros. It's very familiar territory, I think, for them, and familiar territory for me. So it's, you know, you only have like 5 hours with them for a 2-hour program. So everything becomes very professional. We try to do things as artistically as possible while still maintaining very professional decorum.
Cool. So tomorrow night is your first night in Montreal as a conductor. It's great. And there's a tradition now of listeners of game music or video music, etc., that increase. So you're quite welcome to put your stone on the building. So that's great. And you're going to play also next week in Quebec City, don't you?
Yeah, that's right. So tomorrow night we're here in Montreal at Place des Arts, and then next Thursday night we're in Quebec City.
Cool. So everybody is looking forward to listen to that. Just my last question: you see in this kind of music audience, which is a sort of symphonic subgenre, is there a circulation, a mobility between this subgenre and a new interest to other kinds of symphonic music, not only classical, romantic, modern, contemporary, etc.? Do you see this shift, or do people remain in their bubble?
Yeah, I do see a shift, and I think it's a very interesting shift, and I think it's a very profound and important shift, because what I see happening is, if you think about the Gen X and Gen Y and Gen Z, you basically have people who were born in the 80s going through about 2010. So people who are in that age group were the first people who were introduced to things like MTV and VH1. So they have this deep connection between audio and video. It's like an inherent natural connection between audio and video. They also were the first generation of console and computer games. So they have now matured. They're in their 30s and they're in their 40s and they're in their 50s. And they were listening to and consuming orchestral music in a lot of the game soundtracks that they were playing. And they were doing it in a way that was connected to video, to image, and at the same time connected to the gameplay. So they had this physical reaction, so this very visceral reaction. And I think that created a bond between the audience member and the music that has established orchestral music as being just another genre of music that they enjoy, like rock and roll or jazz or pop or electronic music. I think that generation doesn't make the distinction between orchestral music being classical or orchestral music being modern or orchestral music being romantic or baroque or whatever the other genres might be. I think they consider it orchestral music, and that's why I tend to use the terminology orchestral music and not classical music, because I do think that it's a generation that is really just taking in the whole body of the orchestra and considering that their own symphonic music.
Great to hear. So we're looking forward to listen to this next chapter of gaming music with you, Andy Brick. Thanks a lot to be with us.
Well, thank you. Yeah, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thanks. We do too. Bye.
Bye-bye.